All right, so I'm going to get started. I'm first going to introduce Brian. Dr. Brian D'Agostino is a political scientist and the editor of Disarmament Times. He's the author of peer-reviewed research on the psychology of militarism and of the middle class fights back, a study of the recent political economy of the United States. Dr. D'Agostino has published numerous articles on political psychology and public affairs in popular and academic venues. So, Brian, over to you. Would you like me to share the PowerPoint at this time?
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll share the PowerPoint.
We're having some technical difficulties here.
Let's see. Oh, let me just go back to the beginning on it. There we go. All right, here we are.
Okay, so thank you. Why don't you just turn your phone off completely, Connie? I'm sorry, we're having a technical problem here. Turn off the phone completely. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I have a presentation I'm calling Understanding the Ukraine War, NATO and the Psychology of Militarism. So you can see from my graphic what I'm going to do here, talk about the irrational motivations associated with NATO expansion. And you'll see from what I have to say how that works. We'll start, next slide, we'll start with dynamics of the Ukraine war. And I want to start by saying that the US and European claims that Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked falsify the historical record. Such claims serve to legitimize NATO expansion and the tens of billions of dollars of arms transfers to Ukraine. What was really unprovoked is NATO expansion itself. And we have some what are called Washington gaffes to reveal the truth. Washington gaffe is when a Washington insider, kind of by mistake, tells the truth and lets slip what's really going on. So the first one is from Fiona Hill, who was a national security professional, very high ranking. She was at the time part of the US National Intelligence Council. And this is from a February 28th, 2022 interview. This is just before the Ukraine war, or I should say before Putin invaded Ukraine. So she's in an interview with a Politico magazine, and the journalist asks or says, so Putin is being driven by emotion right now, not by some kind of logical plan. They're talking about the threat of war that was imminent at that moment. And then Fiona Hill, correcting the interviewer, says, and this is her quote, I think there's been a logical plan, a logical, methodical plan that goes back a long way, at least to 2007. Note that year is also before Putin's invasion of Crimea. So she says this plan of Putin's goes back at least to 2007, when he put the world and certainly Europe on notice that Moscow would not accept the further expansion of NATO. Back then, I was a national intelligence officer, and the National Intelligence Council was analyzing what Russia was likely to do in response to the NATO policy regarding Ukraine and Georgia. One of our assessments was that there was a real, genuine risk of some kind of preemptive military action, not just confined to annexation of Crimea, but some much larger action taken against Ukraine. So she made these comments in 2007, back before the invasion of Crimea, and she could predict basically that the US policy was being toward Ukraine or toward Russia was being provocative.
Right.
Okay, so now there's another one here from Jens Stoltenberg, who is the Secretary General of NATO, or was at the time. And this he says this in 2023. Now this is with hindsight of Putin having already invaded Ukraine. And Stoltenberg says, this is the context is, he's making a public statement that is intended to embarrass Putin. But in the process of saying this, he reveals what's really contradicts the party line that was publicly being said, which was that Russia was just being an aggressor. So Stoltenberg says, President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent the draft treaty that they wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. Of course, we didn't sign that. He wanted us to sign that promise never to enlarge NATO. We rejected that. So he went to war to prevent more NATO close to his borders. He got the exact opposite, end quote, which is to say that new countries then wanted to join NATO and were admitted to NATO. So in the process of trying to embarrass Putin by saying, well, look at this, he ended up getting exactly what he didn't want. In the process of doing that, he reveals that that is why Putin invaded Ukraine, was to prevent the expansion of NATO. Okay, so these Washington gaffes, I think, shed light on the real reasons behind the scenes of what this war is all about. Now, we go to the next one. NATO expansion is not a rational policy, right? It first occurred in 1999 and 2004. In 1999, NATO was expanded to include the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. Then in 2004, 7 more countries in Eastern Europe were admitted to NATO. So this is long after the collapse, both of these expansions are long after the collapse of the USSR and long before Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. The US and NATO, so there's no conceivable security rationale here. These expansions, this is what I meant when I said that these expansions of NATO are actually what is unprovoked. The US and NATO have been outspending Russia 30-1 on war preparations, including NATO expansion. And to put this in a broader context, NATO expansion was part of a package of other militarist policies undertaken at the same time. Cancellation of security treaties with Russia, nuclear weapons modernization, efforts to maintain military domination of China, and opposition to demilitarizing the Middle East. So the United States is acting in a militarist manner in many different arenas at the same time. NATO expansion is part of that broad pattern. So the next slide, we have policies that cannot be explained by rational motives require psychohistorical explanations. Here, I just want to very briefly mention my 1990 survey of the Council on Foreign Relations. I did this as part of my doctoral dissertation research at Columbia University. And what I discovered reveals much about the psychology of militarism. I won't go into my, in my bibliography, I have a 2023 article that reviews my militarism research. If you want to have a look at that, I'll just give you the highlights here. Hawks outnumbered doves in my sample by 2-1. This is the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a high-level think tank, so to speak, of U.S. foreign policy leaders. So the Hawks outnumber the doves 2-1, and this sample probably understates the real amount of Hawks because my mentor, Roger Hilsman, was a dove. In the cover letter, I mentioned his name, so his friends, I think, disproportionately responded to my survey. So I think I got probably more doves in my sample than there are proportionally in the Council on Foreign Relations and the U.S. foreign policy establishment. So now it's 2-part survey. One part was a militarism questionnaire. The second part was a psychological self-assessment, a list of personality adjectives that I asked the respondents to rank. And using this data, I was able to find that male hawks in my sample exhibit personality traits that have nothing to do with being stewards of security policy. These are personal things like vigorous masculinity, how the machismo is the military power seems to symbolize vigorous masculinity for these folks. And the other factor, authoritarianism, I think relates to the freedom and the power of the abusive parent. So these are the meanings of military power here are not what you would hope from professionals. So female hawks in the sample exhibit authoritarianism. And so these findings challenge the so-called rational choice models of international relations in which policy elites act on cost-benefit analyses. Clearly, the psychology of militarism revealed by this survey has nothing to do with cost-benefit analyses of the actual security policies. So if we've got these irrational motivations going on in the U.S. foreign policy establishment, and these are the folks that are actually winning the policy debates, because if the hawks outnumber the doves by 2 to 1 or more, yeah, there are some doves in the foreign policy establishment, but they're always on the losing side of the policy debates. So the policy is overwhelmingly a militarist policy. And I could document this with the dozens of military interventions that the United States has undertaken since the end of World War II. Now, if the folks who are responsible for these policies are harboring these irrational motivations, then what do we do about it? And actually, there is something we can do about it, not in the immediate present, but for the future. And that is, we can change the world by changing parenting education or by changing parenting practices. And we can change parenting practices by using, we can go to the next slide. Gosh, hope they didn't lose me. Marcie, can you hear me?
That's why my phone should be on.
I think they lost me for a minute.
I think you should use the newer phone. But
Yeah, sorry, no, you're good, Brian.
Come on.
You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you
you're
hear
good.
me?
Yep, you're
Okay,
good.
thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't.
Yep,
Okay.
no, you were fine. We didn't lose you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I want to just outline some of these kinds of policy, these kinds of parenting education programs. Next slide. Next line. So there's a book by Henny and Franz Henny de Richt and Franz Ploy called The Wonder Weeks. And it's a book that outlines the cognitive abilities and needs of infants and the kinds of toys and games that are good for them, suitable for them at particular stages. Next one is home visiting programs for postpartum doulas and pediatric nurses to support healthy attachment and parents' capacity for mentalization, reflective functions. Next one is Margaret Kind, who was a member of the IPHA. You go on the website, go on the psychohistory website, you'll see her article. This was the summer of 2014, Teaching Parenting in Schools. It's an actual program in New York City that was highly successful. And the next one is PEPS Magazine, which is in French. This is our own IPHA president, Marc-Andre Cotton, played a big role in this publication. And finally, we have Ina Rosensvit's own program, Parents First. So these are all ways that we can intervene in the in the parenting that's going to influence the personalities of the coming generation. And just to give one example of how this could work, Margaret Kind's program in parenting was a mandatory part of the mandatory curriculum. It was like part of the health curriculum that everyone had to take. Boys and girls had to take this. Now, if boys and girls are given the choice of taking a course on parenting, the girls will disproportionately choose that course, and boys might be afraid of the stigma of. They actually like the course and might want to take it, but they would be afraid of the stigma of having a course associated with babies. But if it's mandatory, they take the course, and then the feedback afterward is that they really enjoyed it. They thought it was really good. You know, these programs have a track record of reducing teenage pregnancies. They have a track record of making boys more responsible, you know, more attentive to the needs of their children, more attentive to the consequences of their actions, and so on. So these programs work, and they address some of the psychological complexes that end up as the psychology of militarism. So my last slide, I want to talk about the implications of my analysis for the ending the Ukraine war. And so much of what we hear in the news, they're haggling over relatively small things, in the sense that, you know, recently Ukraine and Russia had a prisoner exchange, and we're talking about, you know, is Russia going to get to keep Crimea and these other provinces that they currently occupy, or, you know, is Russia going to is Ukraine going to be permitted to join NATO? All of these things are important in the sense that the reason this war occurred is because Russia was afraid that Ukraine would be brought into NATO and become a military adversary on its border. But it doesn't address the bigger question, and that is, how do we ensure the security of all parties concerned? And by that, I mean not just Ukraine and Russia, but also Europe. We hear all this time that Russia is this menace to the security of Europe, that after its invasion of Ukraine, nobody can trust Russia. So let's go through some of these matters. If we go to the next slide, next line, we have we have to demilitarize Europe and Russia in the security interests of both. Now, this may sound grandiose, but it really boils down to verifiable reductions, arms reduction agreements. Next line. The verifiable arms reduction agreements are a tested and effective path to international security. By verifiable, it means that it doesn't just depend on the trust of the other party. If we say, if Russia agrees in a treaty that it's going to reduce its troops by a certain amount, with satellites, we can verify whether they're in compliance with the treaty. You know, so these arms reduction agreement, and then if they're not, then that triggers remedial actions. And, you know, if the party is habitually in violation of the treaty, then the treaty becomes void. But in fact, if we go to the next slide, there actually are many examples of how this has worked successfully in the past. And for several decades, the US and the Soviet Union had arms control treaties that both sides adhered to. There's something called the Chemical Weapons Convention, outlawing chemical weapons. All of these treaties, many of these treaties involved on-site inspection. Anti-personnel mine ban convention is another one. So entire classes of weaponry have been banned, and various treaties have been conducted to advance the security of two parties in a bilateral treaty, or a multi-party like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, or we go to the next slide. I think I have a bibliography If you want more reading on that, further reading on this, the Ben Abelow quotes that I gave, or the quotes that I gave you were from Ben Abelow, the second reference. And my parenting references were in the article, Sources and Dynamics of the Self. I have an article on Ukraine ideology and military spending. All of that is available on my website. You can click on that bdagostino.com and get the actual copy of the articles. And also this presentation, this PowerPoint is available on my website. Thank you, Marcie. If you go to the last slide, you see my my opening graphic, which kind of summarizes what I'm talking about in this presentation. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.